On this episode, we turn the camera on Ed, who details the end of his marriage to a Thai woman.
So if you want to learn some of the ins and outs of divorce in Thailand, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to introduce the country to the Canadian delicacy of bannock bread. But sadly, most Thais were not impressed by a doughy lump of flour, water, and salt cooked on a dirty rock heated by a campfire.
Bannock what?
Bannock bread. It's a pretty redneck stuff. I don't know if you obviously never heard of it. But
I've never heard of it. Dude,
when we used to
Canadian...
go camping for my outdoor education class or just with friends, it's basically dough and water and a little bit of salt.
Okay.
And you mix it together and then you make it into a flat pancake and you slap it onto the side of one of the rocks that surrounds the campfire.
Oh, geez.
And it takes about 10 minutes and it cooks into like this dough. It's like a dough that you eat with food.
All right. I'm not into it either.
It's very Canadian.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 23 years ago. Fell in love with people telling me I look like David Beckham, so I never left.
Now, is that like when Donald Trump says, people are telling me? Because, I mean, I look more like David Beckham than you do.
Well, I don't think I'm confabulating this. How's that for a big word for you? No, this was a funny thing. And so this is a little bit of a callback because David Beckham was just in Thailand, like now. And
really?
Yeah, I just, I saw it on the news that Beckham was here. And so he's still a star, of course. But back in the day, 20 years ago, when I got here or so, he was huge. And it took me a while to figure out that if you were white, had blue eyes, and brown or light or brown or blonde hair, then Thai people would just say you look like David Beckham. That's it. Like, so it's like if you were white, had blue eyes and brown hair, they would say like, "Ooh, David Beckham, Mun David Beckham." And I miss those days.
Funny.
I miss those days. I wish that would happen more. For some reason, I don't get that anymore. Like, apparently there's no celebrities that look like me. I don't know why.
Sadly, I only ever got Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Or Mr. Clean.
There's a great special and documentary by a comedian that I've just watched recently called Des Bishop, and the comedian, not the documentary. I can recommend it to anyone. Actually, it's really, really interesting insights for anyone who's an expat, because he moves to China to learn Chinese and eventually perform stand-up comedy in China in Chinese to Chinese people.
Oh, I like it.
It's really, really well done. It's called Breaking China. And then Des Bishop also has a recent comedy special that's also very funny. But in the comedy special, he says, everyone in China says I look like David Beckham. He goes, just FYI, I know I don't look like David Beckham, but in China, I look like David Beckham.
No, I love it. No, I understand. I understand completely. And I miss those days. That's all I'm saying. I miss those days.
Yeah.
Alrighty, we want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get every episode a day early, behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, a heads up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. And this week's bonus show, we chatted about a ton of cool stuff, a list of dream jobs that young Thais want, and the surprising choice that made number 10, more half-naked tourists in places where being half-naked is not appropriate, Greg's brush with fame when comedian Jimmy Carr read his text message at his recent show in Bangkok, and pondering over the question of what it means to be Japanese or Thai or any nationality with the news that an ethnically Ukrainian woman was recently named Miss Japan. To learn how to become a patron and get all this good stuff, plus full access to over 700, for real, bonus and regular back episodes, click the support button at the top of our website.
That's a lot of content, baby.
Heck yeah.
As always, if you have a comment, a show idea, or just want to say hi, head to bangkokpodcast.com. Click the little microphone button on the bottom right to leave us a voicemail that we'll play on the show. All right, then. Well, on this episode, we put on our big boy pants and turned the camera inward a little bit to talk about something a little bit personal, and that is divorce. Specifically, Ed's experience going through the process of a divorce with his ex-wife several years ago. Now, while it's certainly not rare, we still think it's not something that most people are overly familiar with, especially if they are only familiar with the process as it pertains to their native land, because as you may or may not know, Thailand does a lot of things differently than they do back home. So when you consider the cultural differences, the legal differences, the language barrier, and other bits and bobs, the process of steering back into the single life in Thailand can seem to be a pretty opaque process, and that's what we're going to discuss tonight. Just what types of things were involved. We should also say that we'll do a follow-up show with the Bangkok Podcast senior legal correspondent Dave Lawrence on the strictly legal aspects of divorce in Thailand. But for now, let's just jump into it and get the layman's view. Ed, we've been talking about this for a long time, and you finally said that you're going to do it. So what are your thoughts on this? I'm going to follow your lead on this one. I got a lot of questions. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I wasn't too keen on talking about it when it happened. It's now been actually many years. I'm not going to go into specifics, but it's not a recent thing. So I've been single for quite a while now. So talking about it, I've got some distance, maybe some objectivity, and I think I can talk about it. And I only wanted to talk about it if I thought that my experience could provide maybe some insight or maybe some help. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if this is actually a tricky question, because marriages succeed all the time and then fail all the time, but I'm not sure. If a marriage doesn't work out, I'm not sure there's a lesson in it for other people. Maybe it was just a unique thing. So I don't know. Right. I don't know if me and my wife not working out is just me and her thing. I'm not sure, or if there's a larger thing. Maybe it was cross-cultural. My ex-wife is Thai, and just for basic background, we were married for 12 years. I'm significantly older than her, but it's funny now when I talk to her. Now that we are older, the gap doesn't seem to be as much. You know what I mean? So,
that's right.
So I'm actually,
right.
I'm actually 15 years older than my wife. But I mean, she's over 40 now.
Right.
So it's like, and so even those words coming out of my mouth, I can't process. Like she's I don't see her that way. Because when I met her, she was just so young, and I was quote unquote old. I was 15 years older than her, and now it doesn't matter. Now we're just both old, basically.
Both old, yeah.
I mean, she sees herself as old.
This is interesting, and the first part I want to answer, I think marriage is really, really subjective, right? There's so many data points that pertain only to that particular couple, so it's really hard to say this is what all marriages should be like, especially when you start bringing in different cultures and backgrounds and stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, something I'm trying to explain to my son, the maturity level between a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old is a massive difference than a maturity level between a 30-year-old and a 33-year-old.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So as you get older,
that's right.
Yeah, things sort of even out a little bit.
Also, I think that for some reason I feel when I was younger that people were kind of similar. I feel like ninth graders were kind of like other ninth graders, and I know they say women mature faster than boys, or than men. Like now, as an older person, I mean people who are 35 who are more mature than I am, and then I meet 65-year-olds who I think are babies. You know what I mean?
It's really funny.
So I think after about 20, there's big variation.
Right.
Like not every 30-year-old is more mature than every 25-year-old. No way.
Right.
It's very strange. It's very strange once you become adult. So anyway, the first thing I want to talk about, just to get out of the way, is the legalities of the divorce. Because in my case, they were incredibly simple, and that's why we need our buddy Dave to come on to talk about the trickier problems. So in Thailand, it's actually quite easy to get divorced if both people agree. So divorce by mutual consent is actually very easy. And so in this case, there was no contention, there was nothing to argue about, and so it's actually really simple, and it's cheap. Basically you fill out some paperwork, you need identification, but as a foreigner, I just needed my normal kind of identification. Whereas when you go to get married in Thailand, there's several steps involved. So you need an official translation of your passport, and then the translation of the passport has to be certified by a professional translator, and then that translation has to be certified by the Thai government. So it's not. I wouldn't say it's crazy what's required to get married, but it's a little bit more than you would think. So it's like you can't if you just wake up one morning with your girlfriend and you decide, hey, let's get married today. No, that's not going to happen.
It's not like you can go through a drive-through chapel in Pattaya or something like that.
That's right. But it's not. I would not say it's super difficult. You don't need 20 things and that takes 6 months. It's not like that.
Okay.
But divorce-wise, if there's nothing contested, it's actually super easy. You just go to your district office, your Ampur office, and you fill out the paperwork. The fee was, I don't even remember the fee, but it was low. I mean, it was like 100 baht or 200 baht. It was like really low. So it wasn't like, oh, it's 2,000 baht to get divorced. It wasn't even like $50. It was like
you almost wanted to be a bit higher, right? To make you like, well, is this really the right decision?
It was very
$10
Thai.
grand.
Whatever I can't even remember what the fee was, but it was very Thai. It was like 125 baht or whatever. It was low. I can't remember. I mean, Dave can go into the details. Maybe it was 500 baht, but I remember it being cheap, really cheap. And then, of course, we needed documentation. So we needed our marriage certificate. And then, of course, Thai people always have to have their ID card with them. But my passport, and then, I have permanent residency. So I didn't have to do any special translations of anything.
Really?
The only little twist was you need 2 Thai witnesses to be the witness of the divorce. So when you hand in the paperwork, and there have to be 2 other Thai people there who sign. And
so let me pause here for a second.
Sure.
So when you went to the Ampur office and you walked in, and did you just say this? Like usually there's a number. Is there a like a queue machine with a little button that says divorce? And then
no. There was a queue, but it wasn't one of those queues where you had to specify. I'm not sure. I think my wife got the queue. So maybe there was a queue for marriage and divorce. I'm not sure. So I don't know how specific. Yeah. So
all right.
It was a typical kind of government office. Listeners out there, if you're not familiar with the Thai bureaucracy, they're big into queues and waiting. And so a very typical thing when you interact with the Thai government is you walk in and you get a queue and you sit down. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know exactly.
Right. Okay. But it wasn't very complicated.
No. And then
my leg.
Yeah, that's right. And then it's they give you paperwork. You tell them, hey, we're getting divorced, and then they hand you a bunch of forms, and then we go and fill them out, and then we turn them back in with our documentation, passport, like her ID card, witness signatures, and then we sit down, they process it, and then they give you something back. Now, I almost called I still talk to my ex. We actually talked yesterday, so we're on good terms and everything. I can't remember if it was actually literally final within the hour. I can't remember that. So that's something that Dave also will have to answer.
Okay, interesting.
I remember turning everything in and then giving us something back, but I can't remember if it was actually considered final on that day, or if they call you up a week later, or if I can't remember. So Dave will, our legal expert, will handle it. But I remember it being very, very easy with one funny kind of twist. And that was this twist that you need 2 witnesses.
Right.
And we were aware of the need for witnesses. But at the time we went, we could only find one person. And so we brought my sister-in-law, or her ex-sister-in-law, my ex-wife's sister. And so we're there and we're filling out the form, and there's a space for 2 witnesses. And we're like, shit, like what are we going to do? Like, we only got one person be the witness. And then I think we asked at the counter, like, because normally when you think of a witness, you think of someone who knows something about the marriage. Like, maybe she's supposed to be a witness to the fact that the marriage has failed. You know what I mean?
Right, a character witness.
Yeah,
like
right? She's like there going, yup, this marriage sucks. Like this, I'm going to attest. I'm going to attest to this marriage's failure.
Right.
But so we only had one person. But then the woman at the counter is like, no. Like any Thai person can be the witness. And we're like, anyone? And she's like, yeah. So I'm not making this up. My sister-in-law walked out to the street, asked a motorbike guy to come in. We paid him 100 baht, and a random motorbike guy was the second witness to my divorce.
No way.
Yeah, it can be. You just need 2 witnesses, dude. They don't have to know you.
You doubled the price of your divorce by getting.
That's about right. I wish I could remember. Actually, again, Dave will know, but I remember the cost was low. Yeah, so I remember the divorce procedure was significantly easier than the marriage procedure. Like, I think you can get divorced on the spot in a couple hours, although I'm not 100% sure if it's considered final at that point. There might be some process where they have to certify everything, and maybe there might be something like where they contact you later and say, okay, like it's done.
Well, that's interesting because when you get married, you get a thing, you get a certificate of paper. But when you get divorced, they don't give you like a certificate of divorce, right? Like,
no, they don't. But there was some paperwork they gave us back. But again, I didn't ask my ex. I don't know if they just gave us some kind of receipt, and then later she got something else. I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, but that's an interesting question.
But the lesson is that if it's by mutual consent, then it's quite easy to get divorced in Thailand. For sure. And in our case, the question of property wasn't really a big deal either, because we didn't have kids, and then we didn't have that many assets, but we had already kind of talked about it, and she was going to get this, I was going to get that. And so they're just, I was lucky. Like, I was just lucky. In our case,
right.
It was sad in the sense that it was a marriage not working out, but it wasn't bitter or ugly. We weren't throwing things at each other.
Right. Okay.
So it was kind of cool in a way that the government didn't make it worse. Like, basically, at least in my case, they were like, well, if you guys aren't arguing, like, let's just make this simple, and it was. So that part was easy.
That's really good. I always just assumed that divorce would be this long, drawn out, crazy process. But I guess if everyone's on the same page,
that's right. I mean, it comes down to, I think what happens, and I think, when it comes to property, and we'll have Dave talk about this in a future show, I think in Thailand, property is a little bit different. A lot of times, it depends. In the U.S., it depends on what state you are in. That's the key in the U.S. But in some states, like, all the property you acquire after you get married has to be divided. But I think in Thailand, they separate common property from personal property. So even if you acquire something after you get married, if it's considered personal, then it doesn't get divided. It's like if I, like, for example, I was whatever. Let's just say I have an expensive laptop that I just bought for myself that my wife doesn't know anything about.
Right.
It's just considered personal property, and it's not part of the common property. But in our case, we just didn't have any issues. So in a way, it was from a legal standpoint, it was probably the easiest case possible. So okay, I guess for listeners, I'm just letting you know it is possible. In this case, there wasn't a lot of bureaucracy. There wasn't a lot of paperwork. There wasn't a lot of hurdles to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the only experience I have with like a Western style messy divorce is years ago when I was in Bangkok and I was living in a building, and there's a couple that owned the entire floor above me in the building. And what happened was they were going through such a messy divorce that both of them were contesting the ownership of the condo. Right. So they had built a wall down the middle of the condo, and like the wife lived on one side and the husband lived on the other side. It was a Thai Farang marriage. And the reason I know this is because the woman was living above me, like I was living underneath her half of the floor. And then one day I opened the bathroom door and I'm like, oh my God. And her toilet pipes were leaking into my bathroom. And I was trying to get her on the phone or something. And someone was like, oh no, she's traveling right now. And then they told the story about how she's spending all of the guy's money before the divorce is final or something. So she was like in Switzerland or something, and my bathroom smelled for 2 weeks. Anyway, long story short, I guess if you contest something or if there's property or children, it can quickly get nasty.
Of course. Everyone knows this. Yeah. So in my case, the legal stuff was not the issue. Good. For the reason for kind of doing the show, I was trying to figure out, is there any kind of lesson for expats? And like I said, it's very hard to generalize from your own marriage, like why it didn't work out. But I did come up with something. I thought about it, and obviously I waited a while to do the show. And I do think I have a little bit of don't know if I'd call it a lesson, but it just, for me, it was a lesson. I don't know how much it applies to other people. So I'm curious what you think about this. You're a happily married man. I'm curious what you think about this. So
Well, sorry. This is just doubly interesting for me because you said you're married for 12 years. It'll be my 12th anniversary in like a week. So
there you go. Well, the funny thing about my marriage, I guess this is typical, is that it was pretty good for about 7 years, which is the classic like 7-year itch. And then I feel like we really started struggling, and we, when I finally got divorced, there was definitely nothing left, and neither of us have any doubts. Like it's one of those things where we really did everything we could, like we spent about 5 years trying to make it work. And so when it was over, it was like over, and she and I are still in touch, and neither of us have any regrets. Like we're not like, oh, we should have tried harder. We're like, no, we did. No, we did everything,
right?
Everything conceivable. Like went to a therapist. Everything. So it was a very long, but we did have, I think, a pretty good 7 years in terms of just she and I getting along. Now we had some bad luck during the 7 years, but in terms of our relationship was fine. So I was trying to think like what as an expat and being in a mixed marriage, a cross-cultural marriage, like did I miss something or learn something? And I realized that I did. And this is something we've talked about before, but I think this is part of the way I learned this lesson. And it's this whole thing of a low context culture versus a high context culture, which again, we have talked about this several times. I really wish I could remember the exact moment that I learned this, but I don't. So I think I was here for 8 or 9 or 10 years before I read about this high context, low context culture. And listeners, in case you haven't heard us talk about it before, it's this idea that Asian culture is high context, which means Asians are used to gathering a lot of information from the context of a situation, and they focus less on what people say.
Okay,
and
I got it, yeah.
Things are less explicit, things are less direct, not everything is spoken. There's much more that's unspoken, and Asian people learn this in their families, among their parents. They're good at reading a situation and kind of figuring out what's going on without someone spelling it out for them, right?
Got it.
Whereas the West, and I think especially the U.S., and especially me because I'm a lawyer, is like we are a low context culture in that all the meaning that we get, or most of the meaning we get, is from something that someone says. So in other words, I'm not trying to figure out what's going on. I'm waiting to see what a person says. And what they say, that's what's going on. And I feel that I can rely on what they say, and I'm not reading the situation as well. And okay. This, when I learned this high context, low context, it kind of blew my mind, and it still does. And I think it's very true. But when I think back, now with some distance on my marriage, I think this was a problem, and it was something that it took me a long time to figure out and realize.
Interesting.
And before I learned this semi-academic phrase like high context, low context, I remember getting in these frustrating arguments with my wife. And I remember standing in front of her saying, honey, just listen to the words coming out of my mouth. Like, that's what's going on. Because she was always reading stuff into something and like trying to figure out what was really going on. And I remember being like, this is it. Like, just what I say, just accept that as what's going on.
Right.
And this was before I learned this whole idea that Thai people they don't expect what people say to be the truth, and they don't expect people to offer things. It's like it also has to do with kids and their parents. I think Westerners are much more likely to do an explicit birds and the bees talk. Yeah. Whereas
right.
where I think I've read that Thai kids are kind of on their own to figure shit out, man. Like I don't think a lot of Thai parents like do the birds and the bees talk.
My mom never did it with me, but I'm gonna have to do it with my son. I can feel it coming.
There you go.
Starting to get pretty curious.
Well, you're a Westerner. There you go. You got to be explicit. But I think that I think I think, and also part of the problem is just that I'm a lawyer, and it's part of my personality. Even though I know like personal relationships are not legal, like I get it, I do, but it's just unfortunately it's just you're dating someone, there's drama, you're arguing about stuff, and I stick to what people said, whatever. I just say like, but honey, you said that I could do this. You said I could go out on Friday, and so for me, like if she said I could go out, then she said I could go out.
Right.
That's a very
Case closed.
That's a very legalistic way to think about it. But I've learned a lesson that the way that when your wife says, "Oh, sure, you can go out," sure, you can.
Well, this is the old argument, right? What's wrong? Nothing.
No, it's exactly right. And I know this is not just a Farang Thai thing, of course. Like in the States, this could be true. So I think I do have the common sense that a Westerner would have in a relationship. That just because your girlfriend or wife says X, it doesn't always mean she means that. So I have that. I'm not that clueless.
Okay.
But I think that I brought my level of respect for what people say, and I applied the same thing to my Thai relationship. It's just there were so many things that I feel like we talked about that I told her about or warned her about, and then she always said the right thing. And then so I'm like, okay, fine. So I've put her on notice of this thing. And maybe some Thai people won't like this, but I do think like in Thai culture, a lot of people just tell you what you want to hear. And you have to realize that you can't take them at their word, or you shouldn't take them at their word. There's just many things that I should have realized that she said something was okay, but it wasn't.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think she was telling me stuff that I wanted to hear, and I was in my like weirdly legal framework. Like, all right, everything's cool then.
Right. All right. Like you've ticked the box. That means you've read and understand the terms of use.
Even though I'm very aware that is silly, but this is now when I look back at mistakes I made, I realized that I think I was doing that.
I'm going to have to read more into that high context, low context thing, because that can probably be applied to a lot of situations across the board. For sure. All over the place.
But I'm not totally sure what the alternative is, though. Like, because the bottom line is I don't, as a Westerner and a lawyer, I don't know what to do besides take people at their word. Other than like to me things like when your girlfriend or wife says, "Oh, sure, you can hang out with the guys for 3 days in Pattaya, no problem." Like I realize that there are things like that you're supposed to figure out. You're not supposed to do. like I'm hoping that I would be savvy enough to realize that, right? But I'm not sure what I'm not sure. I don't know what else to do when I can't take someone at their word. I don't know how to know what's going on.
Well, and that's interesting. This ties into something that I was talking about with our buddy Han, one of our patrons who's in town tonight, who I had dinner with. Shout out to Han. I think that's one of the important reasons why we continue to have, I think a lot of us probably have the majority of foreign friends, is because you need that cultural touch points, those cultural touch points where you can be on the same level with someone and know that what you're saying is going to be perfectly understood.
Right.
As much as any of us get along with our partner who is not from the same culture, there's always going to be some level of disconnect, miscommunication that you're going to have to be aware of and familiar and okay with. But I think a lot of that can be filled in by having friends from your same culture, because that sort of satisfies that need. But
sure. Now, obviously, you are in an ongoing relationship, so no need to get detailed. But do you ever feel that your relationship with your wife, like there's not miscommunication, but do you feel like you have to read into what's really going on a lot? Like, do you feel like she says X and you're like, okay, I know the answer is Y. Do you feel like that happens a lot?
This is probably a good wake-up call for me. I've never really thought of it that way. And I think she has a very Western-oriented mind, so she thinks we see eye to eye on a lot of things.
But she's more straightforward. But you mean she's more straightforward. So, like, if she doesn't like something, it's going to be clear. She's not going to say, "Oh, that's fine."
Well,
And,
there's been certain times like, I remember one time, and this is not going to turn into a Greg and Ed complain about marriage problems show, I promise. But, there was one times when she was like, do you want this thing? I forget what it was. Do you want this thing? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll have it. And she said, okay, here, it's yours now. And then I did something with it. And then I said, I don't want this thing anymore. And I threw it out. And then later she's like, where's that thing? And I said, I threw it out. And she got real mad at me. And I said, but it was mine. You gave it to me.
Right.
And she's like, but I didn't want you to throw it out. And I said, but it was mine. Like,
right.
But there's another situation where I remember my son was very young and I was going to see Lawrence of Arabia at the old Scala Theater on Father's Day, one of my favorite movies.
Awesome.
And I had the ticket ready and everything like that. And I came out and I said, okay, I'm going to go. And my son vomited all over the floor. And
God.
Like, you can still go if you want.
Oh, geez.
Like,
right.
All right. Well, that means I'm not going. And I still have that ticket.
Right.
So, it's not something I've ever really thought about, but it's maybe I should.
Yeah. It's a tough call. Like I said, I can't tell if my circumstances were just uniquely between me and my wife. Like probably that's the better assessment. But I still feel like when I think back, I just feel like there were a number of cases like this where I wasn't reading the situation. She was saying something was either okay or not okay. And, I'm not sure I have a solution. Like the only thing I can think of is if you actually, if you don't have like in our case, me and my ex, there was no language problem because she had really good English.
Right.
So then, so I think like maybe you could actually talk about this exact issue. I don't know. Like I never did it with her, but I wonder if I could have. I'm not sure I would have explained like high context versus low context, but I wonder if you could just talk about Thai culture versus Western culture, or talk about how Thai people tend to be less direct, and I don't want to miscommunicate. So, can you put an extra effort forth? It's okay to tell me that you don't like something. I wonder if that's possible. If you could just address the issue.
It's probably possible, but it's not going to happen overnight. You got to work at it and be very clear and communicate and all that good old stuff that everyone tells us about marriage.
Yeah.
I have a question. Was there any like worry from you or her, probably especially her, that, she was going to be seen as like damaged or an old maid or something like that? Because, in Thai culture, maybe that's some perceptions that people have.
I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, no idea. Never talked about anything like that. Okay. It was just all about her and I and how we were getting along and what was happening. There was never really talked about anything about being single or what it was going to be like to be single for her or I. Okay. Yeah, never talked about that at all. Right. It was all about, like I said, we really worked on it. Like, so there was like, by the time it came time to like actually do the paperwork, there was nothing. There was no doubt about. We had beaten a dead horse, like through multiple lifetimes, like through multiple reincarnations.
So what was the reason on the paper that? I mean, Western marriages a lot of times will put irreconcilable differences.
Actually, I don't know. It's funny, when I was doing a little bit of legal research, you do have to state some reason, but actually, like I said, I think maybe if it's mutual consent, that's what you just indicate. That it's mutual consent. So we didn't have to indicate anything. I mean, I guess it would have been irreconcilable. Like, if it's contested, so if one person doesn't want to get divorced and the other one does, that's a totally different story. So then there's a list of justifications you can use, like he cheated on me. But we'll have Dave talk about that. So like Dave
okay.
He'll talk about contested divorces.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about my situation. Like I said, it might be kind of unique, but I do think it's frustrating. I thought, because her English was so good, I thought communication was not going to be a problem, and I think that was a mistake. That I think the lesson I learned was communication is not just knowing the words that are coming out of someone's mouth. Like there's more cultural things going on that as a foreigner you should try to read, and either get good at reading it, or if you can get your Thai girlfriend or wife to realize that you need her to be straightforward. I mean, if that's possible.
That's a pretty massive takeaway, man, and it's a lot to think about. It also sort of induces us to learn more about how Thais communicate as well, and maybe try to understand that and get ready for that and any potential fallout from that as well. So I think it's kind of like a both sides have to learn.
We haven't, considering how many shows we've had, we actually haven't talked too much about like how to make Thai Frong relationships work. That's a classic thing. There's a million like cheesy YouTube videos on it, but maybe we should open up that Pandora's box. Like, it's an interesting question. So listeners out there, I don't know if that'll help you. Maybe it will. I hope it does. But we will in the future get a proper lawyer on the show to go through the details of more complicated situations. So in my case, the legal aspects were pretty easy.
Yeah, that was really interesting, man. Yeah, and I think that's a huge takeaway for me. I haven't given much thought to high context, low context, but they always say marriage is all about communication, but when you're dealing with communicating into a different culture, it takes on even greater importance, I think. So I think
so, for sure. No doubt.
Yeah, we all need to sort of take responsibility for doing our part.
Okay, let's check in with our new segment called Idiom Proof, where we try to learn a bit more about Thai culture by investigating one of the many funny and creative Thai idioms that we've come across. To help us with the correct pronunciation, we've asked friend of the podcast, Bank, to read it for us first, and then we'll discuss. So take it away, Bank.
ปิดทองหลังพระ
So this idiom, the literal direct meaning is something like putting gold sheets on the back of a statue of the Buddha or of a monk.
Right.
So listeners, if you've never been to a Thai temple, it's pretty common for Thai people to take these small, like golden squares of tissue, and you stick it onto a statue of the Buddha or a monk, and it's a way of showing respect. And typically, I think you buy those gold square things, right?
Yeah, you buy like little matchbook style books of
that's right
of gold leaf. And
yeah,
you rub it on the.
Yeah, it's a gold leaf, and you kind of rub it and stick it on. And it's a contribution to the temple, so you have to pay for the gold leaf, and so it shows that you've given money to the temple. And so this idiom is talking about putting gold sheets on the back of the statue. It means doing a good deed without showing other people.
Right.
So I guess the modern term would be virtue signaling. So this is an idiom about not virtue signaling.
Yeah, bit. I'm gonna try and pronounce it. Bit tong lang pra. Yeah, I think this is so interesting because it's such a Thai thing, such an Asian thing, right? But it's a totally different way to describe something, a similar thing that we have, right? But
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So instead of like walking in and like putting the thing right on the monk statue nose, look at me, you just sort of subtly apply it to the back and walk off.
I can't think of an English idiom that's the same. But I remember this lesson. I remember being in Catholic school, and I remember some passage in the Bible about. My memory of these days, I've repressed it all literally. Yeah. But it was a lesson about that there's no need to pray in public. Like, why are you praying in public? Like, you should be praying at home. No one needs to see you. A lot of people praying in public want other people to see them praying. So,
right.
But I don't know of an idiom that captures this, but I like it.
I like it. One. Bit tong lang pra. I think it's great and really, really cool. And I guess I wonder if it's got like an update now, like a millennial update, because you see a lot of these people doing good deed videos on TikTok and stuff, giving food to homeless people and stuff,
Sure.
And the criticism is why are you filming it? Just do it and accept that you did something nice.
Yeah. I wonder if Thais have if they have an equivalent to virtue signaling, or if they use the Western phrase. So sure. maybe that's another question for Bank. Well, I'll ask him about virtue signaling.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Thanks, Bank. I'm gonna have to remember that. Pit tong lang prap.
Heck yeah. Alrighty. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping in our never-ending quest for cool content. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
That's right. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail through our website that will feature on the show. Hit me up on Threads at BKKGreg. Thank you for listening, everyone. Hope you're doing well. We'll see you back here next week.
No doubt.
I was at Decathlon and I got one of these little rings. I mean, now I look at it, it looks like
Is that a sphincter ring?
No, it looks like it's an exercise thing. You squeeze it in your hand
Oh, cool.
to exercise your muscles.
I should
I
get
remember
that.
reading it. Yeah, they're cool. I was watching TV or something and just sit here squeezing. I remember reading an interview with David Hasselhoff about 30 years ago, who said when he was on Baywatch and they're all like, how do you keep in such great shape? And he's like, always exercising. Every time I got 5 minutes, even if it's just squeezing one of these things, I'm always squeezing something.
Dude, grip strength is one of those weird predictors of longevity. You know how there's a few like relatively small things, like the doctor will give you like a simple test and it'll be like, oh, you're going to be dead by 60. And it's like grip strength is a weird indicator of longevity.
Really? I never heard that.
Yeah, so just
I'm
keep
gonna
working
play on
on
the
it.
monkey bars.
Just,
Extend my
you
life.
might want to switch hands back and forth. Otherwise, you're going to look, people will wonder why your right hand is.
Well, I only bought this for my left hand. Let's just say that.